The Imaginary Armadillo. Pollen was one of the loveliest and least pushy leafcutter ants in all the rainforest, although on this particular occasion she could have used a bit more push. Her problem, you see, stemmed from the fact that she was dealing with a very polite but stubborn beetle named Little Clay. This beetle, who often went by Clay for short, didn't really want to hear what Pollen had to say. Most leafcutters have no problem bossing other insects around. If a simple command won't work, a clever ant might employ some kind of clever trick, or else try to beguile another creature into following its lead. A leafcutter might even promise you a magnificent reward beyond your wildest dreams, if only you would tag along for an adventure. Of course, more often than not, the ant in charge will fail to mention the numerous dangers you'll likely encounter along the way. But then, what's fun about knowing every tiny detail ahead of time? A lovesick bat or a deranged squirrel monkey can only take you by surprise if you don't see them coming. If your heart isn't pounding inside your chest now and again, it can't really be counted as an adventure. It would simply be a leisurely walk in the park. Little Clay knew what Pollen was up to. She was trying to convince him to do something his heart just wasn't into. At least she went about it in the most gentle of ways. He almost felt sorry for causing her so much frustration. But still, he simply wasn't up for a long climb, as he'd already told her several times.
"Beetles," Clay informed her, "are fond of the ground and damp leaves beneath our feet. We aren't really built for climbing trees."
"I'm only looking out for you," Pollen insisted, "and acquainting you with our part of the forest. You'll never learn about ants sulking around down here, and you won't make any new friends. Just imagine all the wonderful things you can see from the top of the giant kapok tree."
"You can see an awful lot of good things down here as well. Why, just the other day, I spotted a 3-toed sloth drifting through the branches."
Then he remembered how sluggishly the sloth had actually been moving, and how tired he had become watching it swing through the trees.
"It was a very large sloth,"
he added, to make the story sound more exciting. "That doesn't interest me at all," Pollen said.
"Why not?"
"Because I'm feeling a fair amount of pressure due to the time. We should leave right away."
"What does that feel like?"
Clay asked with a hint of concern. "Rather uncomfortable, as a matter of fact. We're already late. The more we delay, the later we'll be, and Raindrop hates delays."
"Let her wait," Clay said. "I'm not going."
"I made a promise. We're expected, and I don't want to disappoint her."
"You made a promise, did you?"
"Yes, and a solemn one at that." Beetles, as luck would have it, took matters of honour very seriously. Clay suspected she was playing on his emotions some, but still, he couldn't ignore a solemn vow.
"If you promised," he sighed at last, "I'll go, but please remember how very much I loathe climbing trees."
"I will." Clay knew with some embarrassment that he was the proud owner of 2 perfectly functional wings. Tree climbing should be as easy as mud, but as he told her before, he was still a young beetle, and his wings not fully formed. If he got into trouble in the upper canopy, he might not be able to fly back down. The 2 insects trekked through the rainforest, with Pollen in the lead. Little Clay followed her dutifully, but struggled to keep up because his legs were so much shorter than hers. "Raspy'll be there too," she said.
"Raspy?"
"He's a small ant. Stunted, really. Not much taller than you. If you fall behind, at least you'll have someone to talk to." Clay looked down at his stubby legs and sighed.
"If I fall behind, that doesn't make me feel any better."
"You'll do just fine." They moved along the spines of leaves, under thin shafts of pale sunlight, while moths and bees danced overhead. The forest fell into the rhythm of the afternoon. Pollen suddenly stopped and sucked in a mouthful of air.
"Did you hear that?"
she asked, letting the air back out.
"Hear what?"
"Just listen." The melodies of the rainforest surrounded them. Birds chirped, frogs croaked, and monkeys howled.
"What am I listening for exactly?"
Clay asked. "An animal rooting around in the dirt," she said, clearly on edge.
"Over there, in the brush, it's an armadillo!"
Pollen's eyes opened wider than Clay had ever seen, which was no small thing, since her eyes were very wide to begin with. Before he could tell her that she might be mistaken, she let out a piercing scream, bowled him over, and dashed across the low-lying leaves. Clay got up and ran after her. His heart raced beneath his shell, and his short and stout legs soon began to tire. It was exceptionally hard work chasing after a panicked ant. They leapt from leaf to leaf and stem to stem until they came to a part of the rainforest where the clamour of the jungle died away. Exhausted by the effort of their escape, Clay slowed down. Even the breeze seemed hushed here, afraid to rustle the leaves. It was as if everything had fallen asleep at precisely the same time. Just then, a massive predator skulked across Clay's path. The beetle stopped dead in his tracks. Now he knew why the forest had become so quiet. "Pollen, quick, over here!" he whispered as loudly as he possibly could while still maintaining a whisper.
"Have you ever seen such an amazing creature in all your life?" "Is it an armadillo?" she asked with some alarm. "They eat ants, you know. I don't want to be served up for supper."
"You're safe. Come over here and see for yourself."
"Are you sure?"
"I'm sure." Pollen crept up to his side and timidly peered over the edge of the leaf. Not 50 ant lengths away, a black and orange jaguar was padding by. Both insects marvelled at the ferocious sight. "The prince of the jungle," little Clay said, barely able to contain his glee.
"Now that's something you don't see every day."
They watched the cat saunter off into the brush. Then they continued along their way.
"Did you notice what he left behind?"
Clay asked, trembling with excitement.
"I've never seen one so large."
"Clay," Pollen said with what he took for mild disdain, "you're a beetle obsessed. You don't have to point out everything you see."
"But it was incredible,"
he said as they tumbled down a broadleaf.
"It was the biggest footprint I've ever seen."
"Footprint?" Pollen repeated with some surprise.
"Of course,"
Clay said before the truth dawned upon him.
"Oh no, I didn't mean that."
He scratched his right antenna and took a few long steps to match her leggy strides.
"That's not all I think about, you know,"
he shouted from behind.
"You could have fooled me,"
Pollen said.
"You've been pointing this stuff out all week."
Little Clay scratched his antenna again.
"Well, I am a dung beetle after all. It's in my nature."
Pollen waited for him to catch up and then gave him a gentle smile. "I know who you are, but still, I have to warn you, most ants aren't as tolerant as I am. Some will mock your sticky beetle ways. If you want to fit in, you're going to have to change." Clay bent over and caught his breath. The imaginary armadillo chase had worn him out.
"I'll try my best," he panted, "but I'll probably make some mistakes. Ants can be very stubborn, you know, and hard to please."
"Yes, I know," Pollen nodded, as if she understood his concerns. Then she patted the back of his shell several times and scurried off.
"Ants,"
Clay grumbled.
"Always rushing about."
He watched her jump from a leaf onto a purple flower and slide down the long stem. He reluctantly marched after her.
"How am I supposed to fit in when I can't even keep up?"
he questioned the forest, hoping for a helpful reply from a carnivorous cat perhaps, or a passing butterfly. When no answer came, he realized he was about to have a very one-sided conversation.
I rolled a pile of mud and twigs up into an enormous ball once. It was a lot of work. When I unveiled my grand creation for all to see, most of the ants only laughed at me."
He huffed out a puff of air.
"If I must change, who am I supposed to become?"
The rainforest remained silent on the matter.